In the crowded, buzzing terminal of LAX, amidst the rush of travelers, Marcus Thornton stood still for a moment, scanning his surroundings. His tailored navy blue suit and polished leather shoes reflected the quiet confidence of someone who had built an empire from nothing. He was a self-made tech mogul, CEO of a rapidly growing company, and he didn't often find himself rattled. But today, something about the way the airline staff were moving, the way people were rushing past without noticing him, seemed off. It wasn't the usual atmosphere he was used to in these high-end lounges. He'd just finished a grueling conference in New York, and this flight home to LA was supposed to be his time to unwind. As he approached the check-in counter, he felt that familiar sense of confidence return. First-class tickets weren't just a luxury for him, they were a routine. Long hours and countless sacrifices had earned him that comfort. Marcus was no show-off, but the idea of settling for less than what he'd paid for, that was something he would never accept. He handed over his ticket to the agent, a woman named Linda, who didn't look up from her screen at first. A few seconds passed, then her eyes darted from his ticket back to his face, the smallest hint of confusion creeping across her features. "Excuse me, sir. Are you sure you're in the right line?" she asked, her tone a little too clipped, a little too patronizing. The words hung in the air, and Marcus felt a slight twitch in his jaw. He took a slow breath. This wasn't the first time he'd felt the sting of being underestimated, but it was starting to get old. "Yeah, I'm sure. I'm checking in for my first-class flight," Marcus replied, keeping his voice level. He was calm, but internally he was already on alert. Linda's eyes lingered on his ticket for another second before she glanced at him again, then back at the ticket, her brow furrowing slightly. "First class is for premium passengers, sir," she said slowly, as if he needed help understanding the concept of his own ticket. "I know. That's why I'm here," Marcus responded, keeping his tone even, though he could feel the irritation starting to simmer beneath the surface. Linda's lips tightened into a thin line, and she began typing something on the computer, her movements stiff and deliberate, almost as if she were trying to create an issue where there was none. "I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be an issue with your ticket," she said after a long pause, her voice taking on a strange, almost rehearsed tone. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "An issue?" She didn't look at him as she clicked away at her screen, tapping the keys more aggressively than needed. "Yes, sir. It appears that your ticket has been downgraded to economy class." Marcus froze. He knew something was off. He paid for first class. He wasn't some casual flyer trying to sneak his way into a better seat. He was the CEO of a company that had contracts with this airline. He wasn't the type to cause a scene, but he wasn't about to let this slide. "Excuse me, but I'm pretty sure that's not possible," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "I booked first class. I paid for it, and I expect to fly in it." Linda's eyes shifted nervously as if looking for an escape. "I'm afraid the system has already been updated," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "You would need to purchase a new ticket to fly first class, sir." Marcus's grip tightened around his boarding pass, and a flash of frustration burned through him. "She wants me to pay twice for the same seat?" "Let me get this straight," Marcus said, his voice carrying just a bit more edge now. "You're telling me I have to pay for first class again? For a seat I've already paid for?" She merely shrugged, offering no apology or explanation, just a weak smile. "It's policy." And that's when the world around him seemed to shift. As he stood there trying to process the situation, a new passenger arrived at the counter. A white man in his late 50s, wearing a tailored suit and gold cufflinks, approached with an air of quiet assurance. Before the man could even say a word, Linda's demeanor completely changed. Her eyes lit up and her entire posture softened. "Good evening, Mr. Lancaster," she said, her voice suddenly warm, cheerful. "First class, right? Let me get you checked in." Marcus's jaw clenched. He watched as Linda barely even glanced at Mr. Lancaster's ticket, smiling brightly, effortlessly scanning his information and sending him on his way with barely a second thought. It was as if Marcus wasn't even standing there. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something else. And right then, Marcus made up his mind. He wasn't about to let this slide. This wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about respect. He stepped back from the counter, pulled out his phone, and made one quick call. As Marcus dialed the number, his fingers felt steady, almost mechanical. He knew the voice on the other end wouldn't need much explanation. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a major corporate client for this airline. It had taken years of work, years of building relationships, and now years of patience. He'd earned this. He'd earned the right to be treated fairly. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. Hello, Marcus. How can I help you? It was Sarah, his primary contact at the airline's VIP customer service. They'd worked together before, and she knew exactly who Marcus was and what he represented. I'm at LAX, and I've just been told my first-class ticket's been downgraded to economy. I'm standing at the check-in counter right now. Something's wrong, and I need this fixed. The calmness in Marcus's voice made it clear that he wasn't rattled. He wasn't angry, but his message was firm. He expected a solution, and he expected it quickly. I'm so sorry to hear that, Marcus, Sarah said, sounding genuinely concerned. Let me get someone to you right away. Don't worry, we'll sort this out. Marcus hung up and slid his phone back into his pocket. He'd said what he needed to say. Now it was time for the airline to respond. He turned back toward the counter where Linda was still standing, her eyes now darting between her computer screen and the passengers moving in and out of the line. Her body language had shifted. He could sense that she knew something was coming, but she probably had no idea just how much trouble she was about to find herself in. The minutes stretched on, but for Marcus, it felt like an eternity. He wasn't in a hurry, but he was certain that this would be resolved. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about fairness. He wasn't about to let Linda's behavior slide, and he wasn't going to let the airline get away with treating him like some second-class passenger. Then, just as he began to lose patience, a man appeared at the other end of the counter. He was tall, well-dressed, and had an air of authority that could only come from someone at the top of the chain. The moment he made eye contact with Marcus, the man's face lit up, and his steps quickened. He was moving toward Marcus with a sense of purpose, but not in the way a customer service rep might approach an angry customer. No, this was different. The man knew exactly who Marcus was. Mr. Thornton, I'm so sorry for the delay. We've just received a report of your situation, the man said, his voice calm but laced with urgency. He extended a hand, a gesture of both apology and professionalism. I'm William, the Customer Relations Director. I understand we've caused you some trouble. Let me make this right for you. Marcus raised an eyebrow. There was no way this was a coincidence. William was here because he knew Marcus was one of their biggest clients. He wasn't here because Marcus had raised a fuss at the counter. No, this was a response to something far bigger than just one minor issue with a seat. I appreciate you coming over, Marcus said, offering a polite nod, though he didn't reach for the man's hand. He wasn't here to make friends. But let's cut to the chase. I was told I had to pay for my first-class seat again because of some system error. Meanwhile, I watched as another passenger, who, by the way, is not even a regular, was checked in without a hitch. William's face tightened as he absorbed the situation. His eyes briefly flicked to Linda, who was now standing frozen by the counter. The room seemed to quiet down as if everyone was waiting for his next move. I can assure you, Mr. Thornton, this is not how we do business, William said quickly, though his voice softened slightly, trying to placate Marcus. Let me get to the bottom of this. It won't happen again. Marcus didn't miss the glance William threw at Linda. He could tell this wasn't just about a technical glitch. It wasn't just about a mistake in the system. Something more had been at play. I'm not worried about that, Marcus replied coolly. I'm concerned about how often this happens and how you plan on addressing it moving forward. This isn't just a minor hiccup for me. It's a signal that something's broken in your operation. If I find out this isn't the first time something like this has happened, I won't just stop flying with your airline. I'll make sure every one of my clients and partners knows exactly what kind of service I'm receiving here. William's face paled slightly, and he took a deep breath before responding. You have my word, Mr. Thornton. We will investigate this thoroughly. This issue will be resolved, and we will make sure it never happens again. As for your flight, we've upgraded you to our VIP suite, no charge. Marcus could feel the weight of the words sinking in. It wasn't just about the upgrade. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about respect. As Marcus turned away and headed toward the VIP lounge, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew Linda had just learned a very valuable lesson, and so had the airline. This wasn't just about a plane ticket. It was about something much more important: dignity. Marcus stepped through the glass doors of the VIP lounge, his movement slow and deliberate. He wasn't rushing. He wanted a moment to process everything. The quiet hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. The stark contrast between the chaos at the check-in counter and the refined atmosphere here wasn't lost on him. A flight attendant in a navy blue uniform approached him with a polite smile. Mr. Thornton, we have your suite ready. Please follow me. He nodded, following her down a short hallway that led to an exclusive area, secluded, quiet, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway. The private suite was sleek, minimalist, designed for high-profile travelers who valued both privacy and comfort. As he settled into the leather recliner, Marcus pulled out his phone. He wasn't the type to hold grudges, but he also wasn't the type to ignore a problem when he saw one. He scrolled through his emails, his mind already piecing together the next steps. His company spent millions on travel annually. If this was how the airline treated one of their most valuable clients, he had to wonder, how often did this happen to others? People without the influence or financial backing to push back. A notification popped up, an email from Sarah, the VIP service representative he had called earlier. Subject: urgent, LAX incident. Marcus tapped the screen, skimming through the message. It was an official apology, reiterating what William had said at the counter. Standard corporate language, nothing surprising. But at the bottom, something caught his eye. We take this matter very seriously, and we are launching an internal review of our check-in procedures. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We value your partnership. He exhaled, locking his phone. It was a diplomatic response, carefully worded to acknowledge the issue without admitting liability. But Marcus wasn't looking for an apology. He wanted accountability. A soft knock at the suite door interrupted his thoughts. When it opened, William stepped inside, his expression composed but tense. "Mr. Thornton," he began, keeping his tone measured, "I wanted to follow up personally. We're addressing the issue with our team." Marcus leaned back, studying the man for a moment. He could tell William was walking a fine line. Damage control mode activated. "I appreciate the effort," Marcus said, his voice even. "But let's be honest, if I weren't who I am, this wouldn't have been fixed. And that's the real problem." William hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You're right. And that's exactly why we're looking into this further." Marcus arched a brow. "And what happens to Linda?" William's jaw tightened. He wasn't expecting the question, but Marcus wasn't going to let it slide. "She's being reviewed," William admitted. "Situations like this require proper handling. It's not always as clear-cut as it seems." Marcus wasn't interested in excuses. He knew corporate talk when he heard it. "Let me put it this way," he said, keeping his gaze locked on Williams. "I don't care about one employee. I care about the pattern. If this is how things operate, it's only a matter of time before you lose more than just one client." William nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of Marcus's words. "We'll make changes," he assured. Marcus gave a small, knowing smile. "Let's hope so." As William left, Marcus glanced out the window at the runway. He had made his point. Now it was up to them to decide whether they were going to listen. Marcus watched as William disappeared through the suite door, his expression unreadable. The conversation had played out exactly as expected. Corporate diplomacy at its finest. They wanted the problem to disappear, and he had made it clear that wouldn't happen. He leaned back in his chair, letting his eyes drift across the tarmac outside. A soft chime from his phone snapped him out of his thoughts. Another email, this one from an unknown sender. Subject: "You're not the only one." His brow furrowed as he opened it. "Mr. Thornton, I saw what happened at the check-in counter. You handled it better than most would have, but I wanted you to know you're not the first, and you won't be the last. This has been happening for years. If you're serious about change, you might want to dig a little deeper." No name, no signature, just a simple warning. Marcus tapped his fingers against the armrest, his mind already shifting gears. He'd assumed his experience was an isolated incident, but if this email was telling the truth, it was something much bigger. A pattern, a culture. He stood, smoothing the wrinkles from his blazer. He wasn't done here. Within minutes, he was back in the main lounge, his presence drawing more than a few curious glances. He ignored them, heading straight for the check-in counters where everything had started. Linda was gone. A new agent stood in her place, smiling politely at the next passenger. Marcus wasn't interested in small talk, he needed answers. Stepping to the side, he pulled out his phone again, this time making a call to a different number. "James, it's me," he said when the line connected. James Mitchell had been his legal advisor for years, a man who knew the ins and outs of corporate policies like the back of his hand. "Marcus," James greeted, his voice sharp. "Everything okay?" "Maybe," Marcus replied. "I need you to do something for me, quietly." A pause, then, "I'm listening." "I need information on this airline," Marcus said. "Specifically cases of ticket downgrades, customer complaints, anything that suggests a pattern. And if there's legal precedent, I want to know. James exhaled. You think this goes deeper? I know it does, Marcus said simply. And I want to see how far. James was silent for a moment. I'll look into it. Give me a couple of days. Marcus ended the call and slid his phone back into his pocket. As he turned, he caught a glimpse of another airline employee watching him from a distance. The man quickly looked away, pretending to focus on his screen. Marcus smirked. He had their attention now, and he wasn't going anywhere. Marcus returned to his suite, his mind racing. The email had changed everything. If this wasn't an isolated incident, then what had happened at the check-in counter was just the tip of the iceberg. He poured himself a glass of water from the minibar, letting the coldness ground him as he thought through his next move. His phone buzzed again, another email, this time from James. Subject, initial findings. That was fast. Marcus opened it, scanning the contents. I pulled some preliminary reports. Your instincts were right. There have been multiple complaints about ticket downgrades due to system errors, most of them involving first-class passengers. But here's the kicker. The majority of the affected travelers share one common trait. They don't fit the typical first-class profile. Different ethnicities, younger professionals, entrepreneurs. Meanwhile, longtime elite flyers, especially legacy corporate clients, seem untouched. Marcus clenched his jaw. It was worse than he thought. This wasn't just incompetence, it was targeted. Another line stood out. Several complaints were dismissed without investigation, no refunds, no formal responses. He let out a slow breath. This wasn't a glitch. It was policy, an unspoken rule, buried under corporate language and plausible deniability. His fingers hovered over his phone. He could escalate this immediately, make a public statement, bring the airline's reputation crashing down in a single press release. But that wasn't how he operated. He didn't just react. He calculated. He needed more. Standing, he stepped out of his suite and walked toward the lounge bar. He wasn't just here to wait for his flight anymore. He was here to observe. His eyes swept across the room, noting the way employees interacted with different passengers. He saw it now, the subtle shifts in attitude, how some travelers were greeted with warmth, while others were met with forced politeness or barely concealed impatience. Then he noticed her, a woman, mid-40s, impeccably dressed, sitting at a corner table with her arms crossed. She wasn't sipping her drink. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was watching. And the moment Marcus met her gaze, she nodded, just slightly. An invitation. He made his way over. Mind if I join you? She gestured to the seat across from her. I was wondering when you'd come over. Marcus sat, studying her. There was something sharp in her eyes, something that said she knew exactly why he was here. You were at the counter, he said. It wasn't a question. She smirked. I was, and I've seen this happen before. Marcus leaned forward. Tell me everything. The woman's expression darkened. Oh, I will. But first, let me tell you how deep this goes. Marcus studied the woman across from him, his instincts telling him she wasn't here by accident. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had been through this before, someone who knew things that weren't meant to be spoken aloud. He didn't interrupt as she took a slow sip of her drink, letting the tension linger just long enough before she finally spoke. You're not the first, she said, her voice calm but edged with something sharper. And unless things change, you won't be the last. Marcus leaned in slightly. Tell me what you know. The woman exhaled, setting her glass down. First-class check-in. There's an unspoken system, an internal bias. If you don't fit the ideal passenger profile, suddenly there's an issue with your ticket. An issue with a glitch, an overbooking, a random downgrade. But if you match their preferred clientele, no problems, no delays. Marcus narrowed his eyes. Preferred clientele? She nodded. Old money, legacy travelers, people they don't have to verify. Everyone else, they get scrutinized, and sometimes quietly pushed out. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had always known discrimination could be subtle, insidious, wrapped in corporate language, but hearing it spelled out so plainly, it hit differently. How do you know all this? He asked. The woman smirked, but there was no humor in it. Because I used to work for this airline. 10 years. Customer relations. That caught his attention. You worked here? She nodded. Until I saw too much, asked the wrong questions. Then suddenly my performance wasn't meeting expectations. She shrugged. They pushed me out before I could make noise, but I still have friends on the inside. And trust me, this goes deeper than a few bad employees. Marcus let that sink in. This wasn't about one gate agent. This was systemic. And worse, it had been going on for years. "Why tell me?" he asked, watching her carefully. The woman tilted her head. "Because you're the first person I've seen fight back in real time. Most people walk away, take the loss, assume it was just bad luck. But you had the power to make them scramble. And that means you have the power to do more." Marcus sat back, considering her words. He wasn't one to play the hero, but he also wasn't the kind of man who ignored the truth once he saw it. "What's your name?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Let's just say I'm someone who's been waiting for the right person to listen." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure they hear us loud and clear." Marcus sat back, absorbing everything. The woman, whoever she was, had just handed him the missing piece. This wasn't just incompetence. It was a system, one built to quietly favor a select group while keeping others out. And now, he had to decide what to do with that information. He studied her for a moment. She was composed, but there was something else beneath the surface. A quiet frustration, a need for justice. "You said you still have contacts inside," he said. "How high up?" She smirked, swirling the last of her drink before setting it down. "High enough to confirm what you already suspect, but low enough that they can't do anything about it." Marcus exhaled through his nose. That made sense. The ones who saw the problem weren't the ones who could fix it. The ones who could fix it were the ones benefiting from it. "So what now?" she asked. "You gonna make noise or let it slide like everyone else?" Marcus glanced at his watch. His flight was boarding in less than an hour, but this wasn't over. Not even close. "I don't make noise," he said. "I apply pressure." The woman nodded approvingly. "That's what they're afraid of." Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to James. "Get me everything on the airline's internal bias complaints, lawsuits, settlements, media coverage, past and present." A response came almost immediately. "Already digging. There's more than I expected. We'll call soon." Marcus locked his phone. He could already see the path forward. If this airline thought they could keep sweeping this under the rug, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. But first, he had one last thing to do before boarding. He stood, straightening his blazer. "Thanks for the insight," he told the woman. "I owe you one." She chuckled. "No, you don't. Just make sure this doesn't disappear like everything else." Marcus gave a slight nod before heading back toward the main terminal. He wasn't just boarding a flight anymore. He was about to start something much bigger. Marcus walked through the terminal with the calmness of a man who had already decided the outcome. His mind wasn't on the flight anymore. It was on what came next. He had the information. He had the leverage. Now he just needed to make the right move. His phone buzzed. "James." "I found something," James said the moment Marcus picked up. "A case from 2 years ago. Similar complaint. First-class downgrade, no refund. The passenger was a lawyer. He filed a complaint, but the airline settled quietly. NDA locked it up." Marcus's pace slowed. A settlement meant one thing. They knew. This wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern they'd paid to keep quiet. "How much did they settle for?" Marcus asked. James hesitated. 50 grand. Marcus smirked. "That's it?" "For a single case, yeah," James replied. "But if there's more, and I think there is, that's a different story." Marcus reached the boarding gate. The airline staff smiled at him now. Their demeanor changed, forced into politeness. The power shift was already happening. "You want me to dig deeper?" James asked. "No," Marcus said. "I have a better idea." He ended the call and walked straight to the check-in counter, right up to William, who had been speaking with another agent. The man stiffened when he saw him. "Mr. Thornton," William said cautiously. Marcus didn't waste time. 2 years ago, a lawyer, same downgrade issue. The airline settled for 50 grand. He watched the color drain from William's face. "Tell me, how many more settlements like that are buried in your system?" William swallowed hard. I'm not at liberty to discuss." "Wrong answer," Marcus cut in. "Let me make this simple. I could take this public. I could have every major outlet running a story on your technical issues by morning. But I don't want your apology, and I don't want your PR statement." He let the words settle before delivering the final blow. "I want a policy change, effective immediately." William's jaw tightened. He knew this wasn't a request. I'll have to escalate this," he said. Marcus leaned in slightly. "Do that, and tell them they have 48 hours before I escalate it myself." He turned without another word and walked onto the jet bridge. As he stepped onto the plane, his first-class seat waiting, a flight attendant approached. "Mr. Thornton, welcome aboard," she said, smiling nervously. "We've prepared something special for you." Marcus raised an eyebrow as she handed him a note. No airline branding, no sender name, just 4 simple words. "You're not done yet." Marcus stared at it for a moment, then let out a quiet chuckle. Now things were really getting interesting.